Hello, everyone. Good evening once again, and welcome back to Case by Case by Small Case in association with Ethical Advisors. And today we have a very special guest with a very special topic, and that is all about public sector units, PSUs, and why it's very valuable. It has very deep value, and a re-rating is very imminent. And so I was talking to Mr. Dick Hosimori, who is our guest today. He is a veteran in the Indian equity markets for more than 30 years. And he has been in different financial hubs all around the world, San Francisco, Mumbai, and all the way to Florida, among other places. We're really glad to have you, sir. So tell us a bit about yourself and your firm and what's so special about PSUs and how you could enlighten us with the topic at hand today.
Yes, Abel, thanks to you and special thanks to the team at Small Case for working hard to put this together. We are always honored to partner with Small Case as our firm Ethical Advisors is a one-stop shop, which while it specializes in equity, it also does a multitude of things for its investors and for its clients in general. Yes, the public sector space is a very mystical space. It is something which either is understood in fractions or it is completely ignored and people make an attempt not to understand. In fact, as the joke goes, in my 30 years career as an investment banker, and I have worked with very marquee firms like Morgan Stanley, Deutsche Bank, JP Morgan, in the dealing room, they used to call me the PSU bull because I was probably the only one who has kept faith in public sector unit shares and their ability to return investors. I mean, many have tried to keep faith and lost along the way because there is a history of underperformance of state-owned units. It's not just in India, but also globally. So much so that some of my colleagues would use the acronym PSU as pretty sad units. And I completely disagree. I completely disagree. So
So I
yeah,
think
that's just
I
a
think
jocular
that's why
introduction.
today is very valuable. I mean, you were saying how PSUs are deeply misunderstood by a lot of people, and so I think today is a very strange, but definitely in a good way that we are going to dive into something, as you said, very mystical, but also very logical, very strategical, and something that we have not been across very often about. So. Today is all about public sector units, and thank you so much for coming on board to do this and taking your time on a Saturday evening. So the floor is yours, and yeah, take it over.
Sure. At the outset, first of all, thanks a lot to all the viewers who have chosen to be on this platform today on a hot Saturday afternoon. A very warm welcome and many, many thanks for joining us. I'm sure at the end of it, you will go back. In fact, we all will go back learning something. And I'm sure this time that we spend today will not go waste. Before I go into my presentation, there is a small request. I would rather make this an interactive webinar, something which the platform is not just mine to share, it's for us all. The way we'll go about it, as I thought, I have a very crisp presentation on our thoughts on the thesis of public sector undertakings, but intermittently, maybe with a slight warning, I will pose some questions just to make sure that we are in the same loop. Like I said, many people may tend to drop out or may lose interest. So I think the interaction live is very important. At the end of it, of course, we'll do the Q&A where we can always post questions on the chat and I'll be very, very glad to answer those. So guys, without any delay, let me share my thoughts via PPT. Just wait till I load the presentation. Okay, guys. So the topic for today's discussion and deliberation, and please keep your comments and arguments coming, is PSU's deep value. Currently, they are deep value, and we believe at Ethical Advisors that their re-rating is imminent. let's move to slide. So, friends, at the outset, it is very important for us to understand what is a public sector undertaking. And at this stage, suffice to say that these companies, unlike private enterprises, are those companies in different businesses, but where this government, either the central government or the state government, has a controlling stake. Controlling meaning more than 51% stake. The Our thesis is that these companies, either owned by the central or state, they are the ones who are responsible for the management of the business. They're responsible for the growth strategy, and they're also responsible for shareholder returns, leave alone environmental friendliness, etc. But these are the main characteristics of a public sector enterprise. The core nature of a business, however, does not change just because the owner is different. Now, this is a very important point we are trying to make here. Uh, we have, let's say, a steel mill, which is a million ton steel plant, which is run by a private sector enterprise or it is run by the government. At the end of the day, the core business fundamentals should not matter, should not be different. What is different, we will reach out and we will address in different slides going forward. Thus, the conclusion on this slide is that all things, other things being equal, the intrinsic value of the business should be the same. Now, we'll take a pause here and just try to address what is intrinsic value. Remember, when you're going to buy any product in the market, uh, there is a value perception that you know of. When you're buying, let's say, a television, when you're buying a new generation laptop or a mobile phone, you have a price tag, but you also have a value proposition in mind. So you will get things right from Oppo all the way to i10. And each person decides what is the value proposition he's comfortable with, and then he spends. My point is that the intrinsic value of a business based on which the stocks should trade in the market theoretically should be the same. In principle, that's what it is. But in reality, life is very different. So at this stage, friends, I have a quick question, and maybe you can put it on the chat, your responses. Uh, do we know that India is not unique in public sector being robust, in government actually being in the business of business? Ideally, any school student will also know that a government's main job is to govern a country, to protect its borders, and to provide a mechanism where there is progress. It doesn't have to participate as a business promoter. That is something which is left to the private sector. But it is not unheard of. For example, in the communist countries, or let's say even in countries like Germany or countries like Russia, to a certain extent, France, a lot of Latin American countries, even in the Middle East, I would say countries like Saudi Arabia, Iran, etc. Public sector, which is state-owned enterprises, do exist. So India is not unique to that. And at this stage, my question thus would be, do you know any public sector enterprise which you take advantage of in your daily life? Which is the first public sector unit which you deal with, which adds value to you? Kindly put it on the chat. Your responses will be welcome. I'm going to take you guys to the next slide. I will actually pause for a couple of minutes to get your responses. Let us see who comes out first, and let's see which is the most innovative one. Good. Yes. BPCL is right. SBI, the obvious one. Correct, Banu. You're right. Come on, guys. Only two answers. Something in which we fly on all the time. Fly around. Okay. Good. Power grid. Yes. Absolutely. Banking via UPI. No. That's something which we'll address later. Railways. Yes. ONGC. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Air India. How can we forget Air India? So, guys, this is a small snapshot of leading, large, dominant public sector enterprises. The biggest insurance company probably in Asia, maybe excluding some Chinese companies which are already listed, is LIC. We have State Bank of India, which was erstwhile Imperial Bank of India, and now under the SBI Act, it's probably controls more than 20 to 23% of the banking market in India. Hindustan Aeronautics Hall, as we call it. Air India, of course, right up there. Concord, Container Corp. ONGC, HPCL, NPCIL, Coal India, NMDC. I can go on and on and on. So yes, these are the public sector enterprises, but in our lives, the immediate connect we have is either with the airline or with the banks, leave alone the other insurance companies. So how did these companies come into existence? What was the origin? I mean, why was there a need? India has never been a communist country, unlike Russia or China. I thought I'll add a touch of history here, and only on one slide, take you back more than 1,000 years in Indian history, in geopolitics. Ancient India was a land of wealth and prosperity. Sone ki chidiya, as they used to call it. We're talking of probably not only 1,000 years, maybe 2,000 years ago. We're talking when invasions happened, when Porus was the king in the northern frontier. Porus and Alexander, everybody knows the story. We probably have heard it as kids. Since those times, India has faced multiple foreign invasions and centuries of loot and plunder. This left the country bereft of its past material riches. I was reading an article somewhere which said that 2,000 years ago, India GDP, as compared to world GDP at that time, was probably more than 40-50%. I mean, that's how rich India was and how underdeveloped the rest of the world was. Because of these invasions, loot and plunder, obviously that was lost. Now, circa 1947, we got our independence from the British. They ruled for well over 200 years. Again, same thing. A lot of resources taken away. Of course, the Republic was born. But immediately there was partition. Pakistan was formed. There were successive famines. There were successive wars with Pakistan and China. All this till the late 60s or maybe early 70s further weakened the overall macroeconomic scenario. When we realized the initial path to growth was taken as we had to industrialize rapidly. So the first 3 or 4 prime ministers were besieged with the idea of moving forward. India was largely an agrarian economy because there was no creation of industry. And because of this rapid industrialization, the 5-year plans, etc., were formed. India rightly at that time undertook a socio-economic development model. It was in between capitalist and communist. It was the middle path we chose. Now, to rapidly urbanize, we needed to set up industries, and that too of large scale and size. At that time, private sector was present. Remember, the Tata Group is older than the Indian Republic. Jamshedji Tata probably formed the steel mill in the 1900s. So, I mean, there were the Birlas, there were the Goenkas, etc. But that was not sufficient to boost the industrialization and rapid urbanization path that the governments at that time had figured out. And hence, the government had to promote or take over businesses to achieve its objectives. So it is not that the government had the penchant or it had some kind of a urge to get into business. It was not their business to be in business. But because of this background and because of these objectives, the government had to take over. For example, banks were nationalized, insurance companies were nationalized for a variety of reasons. Air India was taken away from the Tatas and they had to pump money and boost it further. And of course, certain critical industries in the oil marketing space, etc. Guys, you will be surprised to know that what we know as HPCL and IOCL and BPCL today, at some stage, were owned by Shell. So pre-independence, Shell was present in India. It used to be called Burma Shell, but they had to then walk out when this nationalization happened. So when the country had to do it, when the governments had to do it, this marked the entry of governments in business. Uh, Guys, as you again, a quick question on my part. Whenever you are setting up a business, let's say you have a vision for a country or for a city, what are the 3 or 4 basic requirements? Can we have an interactive chat session again? What are the 3 or 4 most critical factors to setting up large or dominant businesses that an industrialist has to go through? Let's take 30 seconds. I'm guiding you on all these because some of these factors will come to play when we talk of the valuations of public sector enterprises. Good. Yes. Infrastructure, absolutely. Yes. Finance, very important. Yes, absolutely. Yes, good. Shubham, absolutely right. Yes, Srinivasan, power, absolutely. Good. Uh, I think the most 3 critical factors are technology, resources, and capital. Now, India has abundant resources. India has enough technology. I mean, India could import technology at that time. But remember, we also had enough talent here, which we exported to the West. I mean, some of the leading nuclear scientists, even before they were, NASA was probably operational, were from India. Homi Baba, for that matter. So the only thing lacking was capital. And that's the point I was making in the previous slide, that it was the paucity of capital that forced the government entry into business. So friends, without stretching this too long, let's take a look at this slide. In 1951, there were just 5 public sector undertakings in India. In March 2019, this had increased to 348. You know, when things start, they just don't stop. Once the PSU culture comes in, it didn't stop. These represented a total investment of 16.5 lakh crores. These enterprises, 348 enterprises, collectively earned 25.4 lakh crores in FY19. So as you can see, these numbers are huge. And thus, presently, public sector enterprises command a dominant position now in corporate India. Unless we saw the entry of Jet or SpiceJet or Indigo, 20 years ago, we were only flying Air India. It was the only monopoly player on local and international routes. So that's the kind of size and scale with which these public sector enterprises have grown. But ironically, the total worth of listed public sector units, excluding banks, on the stock exchange is less than 6.5%. It varies. Sometimes it's 6, sometimes it's 7, not more than that. So what has gone wrong? Is the market wrong? Market is never wrong. Or is there something wrong that we need to understand? So as you see on the slide, dominant positioning, but very underrepresented in terms of market cap. And friends, I would like to actually roll you back onto this slide. Kindly take a snapshot if you want. This is the data which our young analysts have culled out for ethical advisors. It's a very, very big eye-opener. On the left-hand side, we have the top 20 public sector units by market cap. On the right-hand side, we have the top 20 private sector units. I would advise you to go to the bottom of these, both of these tables, and you see the figure 143 and 1183. These are the 2 extreme rightmost figures. And now I'll come to what the point I'm making. The top 20 dominant public sector undertakings which are listed. So the caveat here is that Air India is not listed. Many other large organizations are not listed. Railways is not listed. So let's keep that out. Let's talk apples to apples. The top 20 public sector units, total market cap is $143 billion as of last closing price. Whereas the top 20 private sector enterprises, it is $1.2 trillion. I mean, think about it. Just the top Reliance itself has a market cap, which is more than all the top 20 listed PSUs put together. So also TCS, HDFC Bank, and more or less there. One private company, either Reliance or TCS, has more value on the market cap basis than top 20. Now let's look at which these top 20 are. ONGC, Power Grid, NTPC, BPCL, Indian Oil Corporation, Coal India, GAIL, NMDC, GIC. I mean, the list goes on and on. None of these, by any stretch of imagination, are midgets. These are what we call the Maharatnas, the Navratnas of India. This slide sets the tone for our webinar today. We have noticed and we've constantly been observing that the market cap of the private sector versus public sector has just gone vertically, diagonally opposite. And that's where we are placed at this juncture. Friends, one more question to make it a little more engaging. We would like to understand since you are seasoned investors and of course you have your own matrices of valuing companies, etc. How does one value a company? What is the core value? What is the best way of ascertaining that, okay, Reliance is at this value, or let's say Hindustan Lever is at that value, and I'm going to buy those shares today. I feel it is good value or it is not good value. In short, what is the core worth of a business? I would again leave 30 seconds for our elite audience to come back with certain thoughts which I want to learn from. How do you value the core worth of any business? I mean, today, for example, would you buy a jute company, or would you buy a company which is making old handsets, those MTNL kind of phones? I mean, what, besides perception, what is the core worth? 30 seconds. Yes, good. Praveen, you got a couple of matrices in. Yeah, business model. Yes, diversification. No, what the group is putting is products, perception, etc. How do you define the core worth of a business? Management purpose, future earning expectations, growth, earnings. Fair enough. Yes. ROC, ROE. Yes. Product, service, regular technology involvement. Yes, partly right. Market share. Yes, important. Competition. Yes. Sunil writes market cap, but market cap is a derivative of what the current today's price is. We are trying to compare whether that market cap is worth it. So guys, fantastic response. Thanks again. Our 30 seconds ends here, as Amitabh Bachchan would have said on KBC. I think it's very important to understand the difference between market cap and value of a business. Let's say, for example, today, Hindustan Lever's market cap is X, but its value, the core business value. Now, of course, the value will depend on whether the company is involved in FMCG, or is it a bank, or is it a manufacturing unit. So, of course, there are different, and we have pools and pools of research which go into valuation, and we are also taught in our institutes, our MBA and CA institutes, how to value businesses. But when it comes to markets, perception does play a very, very important role. And I really congratulate all those who have put those matrices on our chat. When you're valuing a business for takeover, the matrices are different. And when you're valuing a business on the purpose of stock market investments, the matrices are very different, significantly different. However, the core worth of any business is A, its earnings power over the foreseeable future. That earnings power also is a function of its positioning in the industry, its goodwill, its track record in delivering, and what the customer sees, not the investor, what the customer sees as a value proposition when he's buying his product or service. Many a times, since I was in school, I've always read about articles which completely malign Indian Airlines or Air India or whatever, and they always used to talk. A perception was created that this airline is this and it's delayed, and I have flown these airlines significantly enough to understand that there was no fundamental difference in the service. It is a perception which is created. So, to come back to the fact that a business value versus market, what it attributes, the difference is only in the core valuation of that business. So, if you're a miner and if you have the largest deposits of coal in the world, yes, you may not have the right technology, you may have a bloated manpower, but at the end of the day, you are sitting on one of the largest coal reserves in the world. So, do we then use replacement cost as the market valuation, or do we use the price to earning and the standard PE ratios or whatever? So, all these things then come into play. Ultimately, as I said, perceptions also matter, and this, I would say, these points or these deliberations which we've done on the chat bring us to a very, very important slide, again compiled by our research team. And this is a big eye opener. You will see now these valuations are only of the listed public sector enterprises. These are hardcore manufacturing, as we call public sector manufacturing enterprises. We've deliberately kept banks out of it because they would distort the valuations or the way we look at things. Look at the red bars, red circles. We have highlighted outstanding performers. Those companies, despite all the negativity that you may talk of, despite all the baggage that they carry, look at their 5-year average return ratios. I will give you 10-15 seconds to just glance through them. Look at some of the 5-year average profit margins, net profit margins. So, friends, if you look at some of these examples, ROE is ranging from 20 to 45%, 46%. ROC is in the same range. Net margins, gross margins, 25, 40. If you are a business owner, if you had your own business, or if your family is into any business, show them these ratios and ask them, does our family business generate such returns? If yes, great, congratulations. If no, would you like to own such a business which some other person is running? Would you like to buy a slice of this? So that's a teaser question I'll leave you with. Friends, a very interesting scatter chart, which we have, again, our team has culled out. There is so on the left hand side, we are using the price to earning ratio, which is the simplest matrix that people understand in the markets. There is a red line, dividing line somewhere in the 16, 17 zone. You look at all those units below the red line. Coal India is at 7p, SAIL is at 9p, LIC Housing is at 9p, SBI, dominant, 25% market share, 15p. Look at the privately owned enterprises. So again, we have tried to compare apples to apples, right? If you have a steel company or a mining company, we've also taken mining companies in the private sector. You got Hindalco, you got JW Steel. They're all in the 20, 25, 30, 32. So this is the reality. This is what the valuation gap stands. Friends, another very disturbing but reality check. The blue line is the Nifty Public Sector Enterprises Index taken from 1996. So we have whatever data we have since we have backtracked it, backtested. And the orange line is the Nifty 50. So till 2008, maybe even till 2011, things looked okay. But see in the last 10 years, how this gap has changed. So my question now is, what has gone wrong? Or rather, what are the pushbacks that have? So again, we'll take a 20-30-second pause, and I want you to highlight what is the single most important factor why you think this gap has arisen, why this thing has widened to an extent that you are almost North Pole and South Pole. 30 seconds, guys. Just one key reason why do you think there is so much of an abhorrence towards these large dominant enterprises? Okay, let's see. Perception, yes. Nikhil, absolutely right. Efficiency, yes, correct. Dinesh says management, very good, absolutely. 20 out of 400 are healthy. Most are saying yes. Jyotinath, not a bad response. We'll keep all the politically motivated comments out. We would request users not to go into that. Underperformance and government policy, yes, correct. Tabri says management efficiency, yes, absolutely. Rahul says uncertain political environment, good. Others talks about taxation. Actually, no, that's not entirely right. I'll come to that. Srinivasan says efficient service, yes. Somebody says foreign investors don't invest in ODI. They don't want the Indian public sector to go. Okay, fair enough. Government sector workers not doing anything at all. That's a bit of a rude comment, but we will avoid that. Okay, friends, good. Let's stop this. Let's go to the next slide. What I have heard continuously is this. These are the most common pushbacks from investors. Now, friends, again, just let's pause here. In my previous role, before we commenced in our ethical advisors journey 5 years ago, I have been a global investment banker. I have marketed in the US and UK with some of the top managements in corporate India. I've also had the honor of taking the ex-SEBI chairman and several PSU heads when we went and we did conferences in New York, London, Singapore, etc. Whenever I have interacted with the top brass, I have never found a difference between the CEO of L&T and the CEO of BHEL or any other such company. But yet, the most common pushbacks from global investors, our investor base was all multi-billion dollar long-only funds and hedge funds from New York, London, etc., even the Middle East. The most common pushback and aversion, as some of you have put on the chat, are these. The risk of management continuity. That is the biggest, single most important factor which dogs valuations. Second is likely interference by bureaucrats. Most of these companies do eventually, directly or indirectly, have a dotted line reporting to the respective ministry. So yes, that's a perception, that's a pushback. Relatively lower transparency. People don't, are not comfortable, especially let's say if you have a listing in US through an ADR route, how many PSUs are listed? So people feel there is lower transparency. Right or wrong? See, these are not, I'm not trying to justify any of these, are just pushbacks. And again, very important, the fourth one, monopoly-led lethargy. When I'm a monopoly, I know that I can sell my product at any price and nobody can question my product quality or service delivery. There definitely comes in lethargy now. This is common, not just here, but anywhere in the world. So right or wrong, friends, these apprehensions eventually do dictate market valuations. If today I feel that Marico is the best hair oil in the world, and mind you, in a blue bottle, they're giving you a coconut oil with a few value adds here and there. But if that's the product which I consistently like, I am their slave. That's the way stock market valuations work. Perceptions play a very important role. But friends, according to me, one can keep finding faults, one can keep bringing out points, and one can keep justifying what is right, what is wrong. I again bring you back to the core fundamentals. And also, I would like to see or rather state here that the overhang of government stake is the biggest hurdle. It is all other factors on one side, the overhang. Now, what is an overhang? Let us discuss that. I will take you back to the previous slide where we had those red bars and those circles where we had the ROC in a jiffy. If you see the second last column, you see the government holding. Government is the promoter in all these organizations. The government holding ranges from low 40s or rather mid 40s all the way to almost 90% in the case of IRCTC. Government has slowly started divesting its stake in some of these units. Such a large government holding creates an overhang. Now, what is an overhang? Let's go there. As friends, as you know, that every country in the world runs a deficit financing model. You may be surprised. The largest deficit in the world is by the US government. US runs the largest fiscal deficit. What it means is that the government spending is several times higher than the revenue that they collect. So that creates a gap called the fiscal deficit. Now this deficit has to be filled. If this fiscal deficit is manageable, life is okay. If the fiscal deficit blows out, then the currency takes a knock. That's simple economics. You don't have to be a PhD to learn this thing. India also, of course, has a deficit financing model. Part of this is bridged by government selling stakes, its own holdings in these public sector enterprises. So you've got IRCTC, Coal India, NMDC, and the whole lot. There's also a constant attempt to list more and more of the public sector enterprises so that this sets the stream for more divestments going forward. I.e., there is a continuous supply of paper from the biggest shareholder in all these dominant businesses. Every financial year, the government has a fixed target. If you saw the budget 2021 in February, there's also a fiscal deficit target and also clear amount which the government has to raise by selling stakes to bridge that deficit. Now, this is something which is worrisome. This creates the overhang challenge. If I am a shareholder in any of these public sector enterprises, irrespective of whatever is their profitability, or it is irrespective of whatever is the return ratios, I know for a fact that someday there will be an offer for sale announced at a 5 to 7% discount to market, and it is going to it's going to break the back of my stock price. Why would I, in my senses, why would I have, or rather own such a stock where there is such a big overhang? So friends, I'll just take a pause here. I just want to ask a quick question and maybe first 5-10 responses. Is this overhang issue which I explained, is it clear or do you want me to spend more time? First 5 responses, please. If everybody's on board, we can move on. If any doubt, we can pause it. Looks like no issues. So, friends, this according to me, is the biggest challenge. Perceptions of management, inefficiency. If you look at the ROC and ROE, it ultimately captures all those. The pushbacks which we saw. So, one example is, let's say if a public sector enterprise which is running a steel mill is generating an ROE of 25%, but a private sector one is generating 45%. So, all these four things which we see as pushbacks are captured in the numbers. It's the overhang part which is not, is my theory. So, what do we do as a country? Do we just ignore these PSUs? Let them be 6% of market cap? Who cares? Let's just buy the winners and stay with them. I mean, that's what traditionally we've done. I mean, that's what most people end up doing. We at Ethical Advisors stand out of it. So we are the lone exception. One of the veteran investment bankers and a very, very reputed veteran, Mr. Jaikumar, who's the MD and CEO of Prime Securities, recently wrote an article which caught our attention. According to him, there is an out-of-the-box solution. It's a very simple solution, something which needs to be really pondered over. He is mentioned of a dividend recapitalization route, which can completely erase this or eliminate this overhang problem faced by the PSUs. Now, eliminating the overhang is important from the government side, investor-based side, and the overall market side. The difference in valuation which has come up needs to be addressed. Now, let's spend a minute to understand what is this dividend recapitalization route. This is, by the way, followed by large private equity firms globally. In fact, you'll be surprised, and as my friend Jaikumar points out, it has also been used by Britannia, it has also been used in the past by NTPC, etc. So first, let us spend a minute to understand how do you go ahead. So friends, if you know a company has a balance sheet, the company has accumulated profits which sit on its liability side as reserves. So there's a share capital and there are reserves. The dividend recapitalization route talks of issuing a bonus debenture. You always heard of bonus shares. You know, Colgate has issued 1:1 bonus. Somebody has issued 1:10 bonus. Those are bonus shares. Here, we issue bonus debentures. So let's say you and I are the management of a public sector enterprise. We have 10,000 crores of accumulated reserves. We issue 5,000 crores of debentures as a free bonus. It's a free debenture issued to the existing shareholders. Let's say in the ratio of 1:1. Because it's a debenture, it has to carry some interest rate, just 6%, which is more or less in line with what the 10-year bond is trading at currently. So let's say I have 1,000 shares in this company. I get 1,000 debentures free. It comes into my account and sits in my demat account. I have two options. I can keep those debentures and earn the 6% interest every year, or I can sell it in the market because, as you see in the second line, the suggestion is that they have a fixed interest and they should be rated and listed on the exchange. So any investor who wants to cash out can do it right now, as long as there is liquidity. So now, what is the big deal here? I mean, why and why has it not been done so far? So here the win-win is for both the issuing company and the investor. We saw the investors getting a free instrument, which we already addressed that. How is it beneficial to the issuing company? Let's say ONGC, for example. What's the big deal? Why is it so? How does it solve our overhang problem? When ONGC issues these debentures, it issues to all the shareholders. Let's say government has a 60% shareholding. It also gets those free debentures because government is the biggest shareholder. For ONGC, the big advantage is that most of these PSUs, including ONGC, etc., have reasonably low to, in some cases, almost zero debt to equity. And if you are students of finance, or if you've even studied the basic finance book, whenever there is a business entity, the entity should not entirely be financed by equity because equity is the most expensive mode of financing. So for the issuing company, it kind of rebalances its debt equity. For him, the debt equity will go up, but yes, it in a way it rebalances. Secondly, under the tax laws, instead of paying dividend, that same amount it will pay on the debentures as interest. The company, the company's post-tax cost to the company is lower, which means its profits will grow. Very simple. Suppose ONGC is paying 1,000 crores as dividend. Instead of that, it pays 1,000 crores on the 6% bond or debenture. It will get a deduction. This will be eligible for tax deduction. So its actual cost to the company may be 700 crores for all you know. So ONGC or other PSUs will be able to report better profits. To the shareholder, there is a slight disadvantage, but let's leave that out for now. For him, he always has the option of selling that debenture if he doesn't want to continue. At the same time, his equity shares are constant. But the biggest advantage, friends, is to the government. The government, let's say, of all these companies adopt the dividend recapitalization route, the government will have a decent chunk of bonus debentures from all these companies. So what does it do with it? What does the government do with it? He's now saddled with a lot of paper, but he needs cash. He doesn't. The fiscal deficit is to be bridged with hard money, rupees. Again, as Jaikumar has pointed out very brilliantly, in India, the debt markets still need a lot of cultivation. Equity markets are very liquid. Equity markets are retail driven. I mean, the retail participation is high, mutual funds, PMSs, but the debt markets are still archaic in terms of going where they should compared to where the savings pool is. In every house, we have fixed deposits, we have PPF, we have NSE. How many of us own a good bond of an NTPC or a Coal India or whatever? The penetration is close to zero. And at the same time, the Indian savings rate is almost 25%. When the government has a huge pile of debentures, which it gets, on the one hand, they can create an ETF like a Bharat bond structure and sell it down to retail. They can sell these debentures to PF entities, EPF, Public Provident Fund, Company Provident Fund, etc. Because those insurance companies, they're dying to own 10, 15, 20-year debentures. So that supply, the government can offload. So I don't think liquidity-wise there's any issue. If you look at it and you cross all the T's and join all the dots, the dividend recapitalization route where the company issues bonus debentures, the bonus debentures go to all the shareholders, including government, and there is a sell down option, has multiple benefits, including an indirect benefit of spurring growth or interest in the otherwise dead retail bond market. I mean, this is the panacea for all evils that one can think of. It is something which is as simple as that, and it should be implemented immediately, is what Ethical Advisors feels. We fully agree with Jaikumar and his team. Eventually, what happens? Shares which are undervalued of all these public sector units because of the overhang, suddenly a Coal India won't trade at 7p, and SBI won't trade at 15p. They will gravitate closer to the private sector counterparts. The overhang going away changes the perception and hence definitely will imminently re-rate the entire sector. So this is something which is the crux of today's presentation. Having said that, neither you nor me are MDs of ONGC or Coal India or NMDC. This is a humble suggestion by Jaikumar and his team, which really caught our fancy and we firmly believe in. And we feel that if this is implemented by the PSUs, or if Finance Ministry is actually listening to this webinar, and of course having read his note, this is a no-brainer according to us. It's a win-win for all. Friends, this is what, again, full credit to the Prime team, Prime Securities team and Jaikumar. $25 billion are waiting to be encashed by the government of India. 1.7 trillion rupees or $25 billion. Let's explain this slide. we have taken a direct snapshot of this from the article that was published earlier. You will see that there are only 4 or 5 entities which are listed here. And the methodology, the coupon rate, etc., which I discussed in the previous slide. So I won't go through it again and waste your time. Suffice to say that if the top 13 public sector units, not even 20 or 25 or 30, a $25 billion check is waiting if the dividend recap route is followed by the top 13 PSUs. And this is the power of that advice. If you look at it, let's take one straight example. Let's take NTPC or let's take ONGC here. ONGC, let's say they issue 75,000 crores worth of debenture at 6% coupon, tenure of 10 years. Its current market cap is 95,000 crores. So the bonus payout is almost 1:1. The net debt to equity post issuance will go up to 0.7. ONGC is the largest oil exploration company with assets all over the world. And its debt equity, even after issuing 75,000 crores of debentures, will be just 0.7. How about that? The government of India owns 60% of ONGC. So they will get themselves free bonus debentures of 45,000 crores. This is the power of the $25 billion check that we're talking about. So friends, at this juncture, again, we will take a slight pause. And are there any questions, or is there anything that I have gone through which sounds illogical, or which sounds a little difficult to comprehend? Maybe 3 questions, please. The first 3. 30 seconds. We can always take detailed questions later, but first cut, any apprehensions or anything that you want me to address? First 3, please. Okay, looks like either I have been extremely eloquent or quite a few of you have fallen asleep. I hope not. Anyway, so friends, this is a scenario where I would say a very interesting, we're at an interesting crossroad if this were to be implemented. Having said that, a much more powerful change of thinking has been witnessed in the last few months. A new dimension has emerged. Historically, governments have, for right or wrong reasons, again now let's leave politics out, but successive governments have defined strategic industries, core industries, for whatever right or wrong reason, they have tried to control or keep control of large dominant businesses. People argue some of these are, breeding corruption, inefficiency, whatever, that is behind us now. But for whatever reason, there have been various definitions, right and wrong. Defense, of course, very, very strategic and core. As you know, in the US, Lockheed Martin is a private company, and they they manufacture things which are used as bombs and whatever all over the world. That's not a government company. That's a private sector enterprise. But in the real world that we live in, for the right or the wrong reasons, there have been classifications. A refinery is a very strategic asset. A bank is a very strategic asset. Everything is strategic. So what has happened is in the last 30, 40 years, everything was strategic and nothing was divested. India had a formal divestment minister for the first time in the late 90s. And there was a separate ministry called the divestment ministry. Never ever had we had a divestment ministry. So we have a Ministry of Oil, Ministry of Gas, Finance Ministry, Ministry of Roads. We had a divestment ministry. Its job was to divest stakes that the government held. Unfortunately, it had a string of successes, but the government did not last long enough for the divestment ministry to exist. So that was history. Successive governments have tried successive liberalizations in the right or the wrong way, and this is where we stand. Now, the current administration has made it very, very clear, and the Honorable Finance Minister, as late as a couple of months ago, is now talking of a strategic sale of select PSUs. So let's pause and first understand what is a strategic sale. A strategic sale is different from a market sale or the one which was causing the overhang that we spoke about in the previous slides. A strategic sale means selling lock, stock, and barrel the government's holding in that entity to a bidder for that company and its assets. Again, like I would like to take you back to the times when Hindustan Zinc was divested, maybe 15, 20 years ago. Balco was disinvested, Bharat Aluminum. When the management changes, when the private sector brings in its efficiencies, when there is continuity of management, it's not that, oh, ex-bureaucrat is the chairman of this company for 5 years, he's retiring, some other bureaucrat comes. That bureaucrat is working hard in those 5 years, but he has no incentive linked like a private sector CEO who earns well. So obviously he's also just doing his job and making sure there's no extra effort. Maybe he's putting, maybe he's not. But when a private sector entity takes over that same asset, it's called strategic sale. The moment a private sector player pays for a government asset, his first job is to increase efficiency, increase the returns, get his own investment paid back because he has to answer his shareholders. The Honorable Finance Minister has stated a clear agenda of strategic sale. There is no beating around the bush. There is no kind of read between the lines. It's very, very, very clear. The Honorable Prime Minister has also recently reiterated the Cabinet's firm resolve, stating clearly that the government has no business to be in business. Friends, these two, when you read these two together, these are the golden words that investors have waited for more than 2 decades. Government is the largest shareholder in many enterprises. Again, don't expect every public sector enterprise to be sold or strategically sold. It's not going to happen. But there are businesses which I think the government has now realized that its job is not to run or to be in business. And that is the trigger that the market has waited for in the last few decades. If we were to question this, then we are questioning our own leadership. It may or may not happen. It may happen with a delay. There will be lots of ifs and buts. There will be lots of deliberations. Remember, India is a perfect example of a well-run democracy where no single party or no single ideology can sway things away. I'm sure it has to go to the parliamentary route. I'm sure there will be. But on the procedural part, again, a very interesting article last week was very clear that the DPAM, the Department of Private Enterprise, DPAM, and the Niti Aayog, they have been entrusted with the task of making sure that the bidding procedure is well run, it's transparent, and also the number of clearances required for one entity to go from the government hands to the private hands, if at all these are bid out. It is their duty, it is their job, they've been entrusted with this job. So we are not reading the headlines and getting excited. This is not something that is being done just to increase the value of these stocks for a week. Things go up 20% and then they fall down and life goes on. It's not like that. We at Ethical Advisors believe that this is something which is, it's a giant decision. It's an orangutan move, but with its own glitches, with its own, at its own pace, it is going to be reality, timing of which is clearly uncertain. Neither you nor me, nor maybe even the honorable ministers will be able to tell you that this is the timeline. Also in the past, the market's disbelief is high because a lot of the past attempts, largely in the case of entities like Air India, etc., have not successfully gone through. But at the same time, while there is one Air India which has its own challenges. There could be a BPCL or an HPCL or an NMDC or a Coal India. Once you understand what each of these entities are engaged in, and I would definitely encourage the readers to do a bit of research, Google search, whatever you may, try to understand the core intrinsic positioning of these companies, which are trading at abysmally low price to earnings or price to book ratios. And then you'll realize what I'm saying. These are waiting to be re-rated close to their intrinsic value or maybe even higher. And we believe at Ethical Advisors that this is imminent. Why higher? And I don't want people to get too excited on this webinar. There is, whenever you talk to any banker, and whenever you talk now, let's shift from market-driven valuations to takeover valuations. Let's say I am a soaps company. Let's say I'm Hindustan Lever, and I know that there is a very interesting, strong brand which exists, let's say, in South India, which I can easily get into my fold. The intrinsic value of the business, let's say, is 2,000 crores. But I know that if I bring it into the Hindustan Lever fold and I start marketing it, whereas that company is just a small South-based company, yes, it is trying to spread all over India. It will take 20 years. But once I just take it over, I can just use my entire distribution network. I mean, I have a presence in every nook and corner of India, Hindustan Lever, ITC, whoever. It will really change the sales trajectory of this brand. So instead of 2,000 crores, I don't mind paying 2,500 crores. The market cap of that stock, let's say, 1,200 crores. This is what I mean. In market cap 1,200 crores, intrinsic value 2,000 crores, there could be an overshoot if the bidder goes aggressive. Now, all these are conjectures, all these are what if scenarios, all these could happen, may not happen, who knows. We as investors have to stick to the core value and try to see whether there is a margin of safety. And we believe that a re-rating of PSUs is imminent. My concluding slide, without boring you all further, is that public sector enterprises offer a great opportunity not only to Indian entrepreneurs, but also to foreign corporations. Remember, guys, when you look at any top-down macro projection, whether it's IMF or whether it's some of the leading bankers in the world, whatever, by 2030, India will have the distinction of being the world's third largest economy if everything goes well. US, of course, is the largest, followed by China, and it will be India. You may be happy to note that we are already in the top 7, so we are not far. And there is already another stated objective by this present administration to double the GDP in the next few years. So if everything is put in place, if everything works out well, even with glitches, India will be the third largest economy. To take advantage of a growing economy with a higher, with a rapidly increasing per capita GDP, any corporation would love to have direct business footprint in India. Why do you think Amazon is here? Why do you think Nike is here? Why do you think Pizza Hut and Domino's are all over the place? It is the Indian consumer. It is the Indian demographic story which they are trying to capture in their businesses and take the profits back to their home countries. Why do you think Volkswagen is here? Why do you think Jaguar is here? Also, Indian entrepreneurs have successfully turned around, Tatas have turned around VSNL, Vedanta, Hindustan Zinc. But imagine an asset which is finally up for strategic sale. So far, government was not thinking. Now they're saying, okay, let's sell it. Don't you think that there will be enough interest from foreign corporations and large Indian business houses to take a running business into their fold at a reasonable valuation, maybe slightly pay overpay, rather than price to fantasy ratios, which today, as we read in the press, multi-billion-dollar global private equity deals are happening at price to, what is price to fantasy ratio? And I don't mean to demean any of these deals. All I'm saying is that when you value a startup based on the future profits it may or may not make after 20 years, and you're willing to pay that price to earnings ratio now, calling it price to earning. But according to me, that business is yet to even survive competition, prove itself, generate free cash flow, and then be valued. But no, today we are already having bidders. I mean, I just recently read that Byju's is valued at $15 billion. Look at ONGC; it's valued at $18 billion. Seriously, I mean, that's the kind of valuation gap we're talking about. So when these deals can happen at some random price to earnings or whatever ratios, why do we presume that strategic sales will fail, as some pessimists talk about? Strategic sales may not get bidders. I mean, to make that conclusion, I think is very, very fallacious. Net net, multiple re-rating triggers exist. Either a strategic sale takes place and everything gets re-rated maybe next week, maybe next year. I don't know. We'll wait for that. The writing is on the wall. It has to happen. It's nobody can stop that process. Or if that thing is delayed, meanwhile, the government probably says, you know what, the PSU debenture route looks interesting. We need to increase the value. Either which ways, as a shareholder of public sector stocks, quality public sector stocks, you and me as shareholders will definitely tend to benefit. When a re-rating happens, you know how re-rating works. So again, at this stage, before I conclude and move on to Q&A, I will leave a very simple question for this elite audience. Now that you've seen some of the Netflix dramas as well. 1992. What is the single most striking thing the year 1992 brings to your mind? First 5 responses, please. 30 seconds. The year 1992. Come on, it's a very easy. It's a very, very simple question, guys. Shubham says privatization. Not really. Stock market scam, yes. Yes, Jyotinath. Stock market scam did happen. Yes. Scam, yes. It's not even born. Fair enough. Arshad Mehta, yes. Sorry, it was So Really not Netflix. My bad. Tabriz, thanks for pointing out. Very interesting answer from Jaspal. Yes, doing away with license, Raj. Yes. Somebody talked of World Cup winning. No, that was 1984. Okay, good. I think the majority of the responses talk of Arshad Mehta scam, and that is pretty much something which is at the top of everybody's minds. Yes and no. 1992 was a game-changing year for India. It is when liberalization happened. So when liberalization was announced, initially people were unwilling to believe it, because if you take the history of stock markets from 1982 to 1990, India was in a deep bear market. Nothing was working for India. And that is right. If you again go to my first slide, India was still coming out of the malaise of the post 1947s and the 50s and the 60s era that we went through as a country. It's only in the 90s when the liberalization was announced by the then Honorable Finance Minister, and the stock market, or a few constituents of the stock market, immediately realized the potential to what it can do in terms of the re-rating. Why I'm pointing out this is very important. When re-rating happens, it doesn't give you a chance to enter. It's already, then it creates momentum. Today, public sector stocks don't have momentum. There is enough time for you to study the companies and make a wise decision, or buy a pack. We are at this point in 2021 poised at a very similar juncture, where a strategic sale has been announced, an intention to do it. There are more disbelievers than believers. I mean, we are the very few ones who've been holding PSU stocks for well over 15 years now. But a lot of people still are doubtful and feel that it's never going to happen. This is exactly your margin of safety as an equity investor. And hence, we conclude that if you are a patient long-term investor looking at good quality businesses at reasonable valuations, public sector enterprises offer deep value. We at Ethical Advisors clearly believe in the stories. We have our packs out for the last more than a year now. Some of our offerings, this is our first offering we started exactly 11 months ago. We have a pack called Handpicked PSU Gems, and I'm told by some of our investors that we are the only ones on this platform who has a fairly robust mix of public sector gems across businesses. If you look at the right hand corner, when we started this, again, as a part of our belief, and this is even before we read the bonus debentures article or before the Honorable Finance Minister made the statement, we already had this pack running. We have invested in this ourselves. We are investors. We have investors in this pack from here and abroad. If you look at the returns and if you see the way it is moving, you will see that it is not moving in ahead of the market, but clearly money has been made in times when even these announcements were not made. So this is one way of playing the theme. Of course, to conclude, we have different other products as well. We are not just PSU bulls. This is just one of our themes. We have an auto pack. We have a financial services pack. We have a crown jewels pack, which is what we believe as an ideal mix of public and private sector enterprises for the long haul. We have a very pocket-friendly pocket money investing pack where you can, as low as 11,000 bucks, you can enter. So it's ideal for budget investing. You can do SIPs there as well, and so on and so forth. So we have a fairly robust mix. The latest addition, which we are very proud of, is the Dark Horse pack, which are the relative good companies with relative underperformance. So if you see in all these offerings of 9 or 10 of our packs in small case, Handpicked PSU Gems is the only public sector pack that we have. Friends, with this, we end our webinar. I know I have taken a lot of time. I hope it has been of use to you guys. Our Twitter handles are there. Our website is ethicaladvisors.in. That is our main website. We also have our microsite, ethicaladvisors.smallcase.com, where you'll find all our packs. You have our Twitter handles. You can take a snapshot of this slide, and we would definitely invite you to jump into Q&A. And thanks again for your patience. Thanks again for the active interaction and participation. Friends, happy to answer any questions that you may have, any doubts that you may have, or any arguments against what we have presented. That'll be most welcome also. Yes, we see a few intelligent questions coming on. Thank you. Thanks for your kind comments, guys. Will the change of government have any impact is a question, a very interesting and very important question. Yes, the change of government has a very, very important bearing on policy. That's again something which we need to address. But friends, look at it this way. Any government that comes in, first of all, political continuity is important. Even within that, majority is important. So if it's a fractured mandate, you have an issue. But what happens is typically, in most of the countries, economics should rule over politics, not politics ruling over economics. And when the deficit financing is the need of the hour, there is no going back. people do make political talks and do tweak things around, but at the end of the day, they come back to the same set of economics when it comes to running the country and its finances. So while it does have an impact, I think it is to be kept in the back of your mind that once the process is rolled out and once people see the benefit of it, a couple of examples are already there. Just check the Hindustan Zinc share price pre and post divestment. Hindustan Zinc is still listed, by the way. Government still has a residual stake. So you will people realize that value creation is the need of the hour. We have, as an investment banker, I have seen IPOs of Chinese companies, largely Chinese internet companies. Also, same thing. State has a large ownership in some of them. Then came the Alibabas of the world. China knows the value of creating value in the market. So I think, yes, to answer quickly, change of government will definitely impact. So if the present government were to change, there could be a delay, but I don't think it is going to derail the thought process which has been put into motion. Bala asks, which is the best PSU stock? Bala, my advice to you is don't go for a single stock. Forget whether it's PSU or non-PSU. Financial prudence always talks of diversification. Single stock is trading, not investing. You may get lucky, you may not. We are ethical advisors, believe in a basket of stocks. And yes, it may sound like an advert, but we strongly and surely recommend our handpicked PSU gems as an ideal way of playing it. It has all the ingredients in a mixed and in a very risk-adjusted manner that we have created a portfolio. So I think that is something which you would recognize. I'm sure there are other ETFs, etc. as well. You may want to explore those outside of our offering. Tabriz has a good question. Why will all this happen? Why this has not happened in a long time? Are we positive just because of divestment, and will the government follow the plan when it hasn't followed it, etc., etc.? Another question from Vineet is also, which type of PSU should be privatized and monetized? Yes, good. These are very good questions. And I'm just trying to see if we can club 3 or 4 questions because there are lots going on the screen. Why market is not, Sujit asks, why has the market not responded positively yet on PSUs even after the announcement? So we'll club these 3, Tabriz, Vineet, and Sujit. Tabriz, to answer your question, a lot of things happen sometimes for the first time. A lot of things are not as easy as they appear. For us to present our views and to deliberate today is one part. To actually have it done is something different. So, as you know, in life, reality is different from theory. Why it has not happened so far? Unfortunately, the answer lies in the democratic setup that we have. It also lies in the fact that you cannot, unlike certain, I would say, economies, let's say in Africa or in South America, where they're kind of dictatorial. In India, there is a perfect parliamentary process for everything. There are laws, there are recourses that people can take against actions. And at the end of the day, whichever administration is in power is answerable to you and me via the parliament. So in India, typically, if you see the story of India itself, it has been more of a hare, a steady hare, not a tortoise who runs fast and then collapses. So it is frustrating. It has taken a while. There is no one answer why it has not happened. But now the resolve has reached a stage where, or maybe the delay in privatizing also has created enough frustrations of people who want to make it happen that we believe this will finally eventually see the light of the day. Which PSUs will be divested? I think it's again, as stock market participants, we have to take that call. Personally, I would be very, very surprised if the defense PSUs get divested in the way that others will get. But everything else which the government or the Department of Divestment or the NITI Aayog defines as non-core, and there is lots of stuff sitting out there. There's Tourism Finance Corporation, there is IRCTC, there is RITES, there is IRCON. I mean, government will obviously like to give up all those where there is no question of being in business. it is going to be a long run process, and we will have to keep waiting and watching. And hence, again, I come back to my point that no single stock should be used as a proxy to this presentation or to the thesis that things will change. The webinar today talks of the sheer undervaluation of the PSU class as a whole. As you saw, top 20 public sector units account for only $143 billion of market cap, whereas Reliance and TCS alone are more than that as a single stock. Hardik is asking, how is the CPSE fund? Yes, Hardik, glad to see you on the show. The CPSE, there is an ETF. It's a public sector enterprise. But I might want to warn you that it is not as diversified as our public sector pack, the handpicked PSU gems. There are 5 companies which are 80% of the weightage on that CPSE fund. So again, we don't like concentrated bets. In our case, our diversification is much, much more better. So you're better off as an investor investing in our handpicked PSU gems pack. Can PSUs enter the market for market borrowings like municipalities, etc.? Yeah, they do. This is a question from Pankaj. They are, in fact, if you note in the debt market, if you go on the NSE website itself, there are lots of bonds which are listed, but they're not very frequently traded. So you have the IRCTC, you have NHAI, you have HUDCO, you have the banks. All of these guys have issued bonds. There are also public state government enterprises which have bonds which are listed. So they do come into the market. Most of these are privately placed and they lie with, like I said, there's a paucity of good quality paper. It gets locked up with banks who themselves are looking to fulfill their SLR requirements. They are, as you know, banks are supposed to maintain X amount in certain government securities. So they're always hungry for that. Plus, there is the huge EPF, Employers Provident Fund, the PPF. They're always, insurance companies are big in India. As you know, the largest private sector insurance company, ICICI Prudential, has assets of more than 150,000 crores. And this space is growing. So there is demand from these guys to invest in good quality long-term bonds, papers, etc. So yes, they are. There is definitely a PSUs do access the market, and there is paper available. Going back to the PSU debenture recapitalization plan, an increase in supply is more than welcome because currently the market is starved of good quality paper. Question from Shubham: why do public sector shares prices go up after divestment news? Shubham, that's very clear. We talked of the intrinsic value of a business versus the market perceived value. And as we saw, there's a huge gap. The gap is starkly big, and we feel that time has come that the PSUs get their rightful share of market cap in the overall market in India, in NSE and BSE. So the thesis is very clear. The re-rating is imminent, but you'll have to be patient. Again, don't get too carried away with PSUs. I would suggest a fair mix of strategies that you own as investors. You have a fairly mixed asset allocation is very important to us as financial planners. What we tend to do is, depending on your objectives, we help people make a plan, make their own objectives clear. Why do they need money? At what point in time do they need money? There is liquidity planning involved. So financial planning is all about getting a handle and putting a method to the madness. And within that, you asset allocate. And within that asset allocation, how much is equity? And within that equity, how much is PSU? It is a process which you'll have to go through if you really want to make long-term wealth creation a certainty for you. Sujit is asking whether we recommend a one-time investment in a PSU small case or SIP. See, again, that's what brings me back to financial planning, which I just spoke about. SIP versus lump sum, I think it all depends on the cash flow available at your end and the planning which you do top down. It's part of that process. You can do an SIP. Our pack is hardly 30,000-40,000 if you go to see. So instead of putting money into, let's say, a mutual fund, remember, it's very important at this point to also pause and see how small case, not just ours, any small case will be beneficial to you. It's part of a thematic investing process. A lot of time and effort goes of us, of our other fellow ideas providers that you will see, their research teams, our research teams. Unlike a mutual fund, which is a large cap, small cap, or mid cap, it is benchmarked to a Nifty or a Nifty mid cap or a Nifty small cap. If you were to invest in a large cap fund, you will end up owning at least 50 stocks, if not more, because that fund will invest in all the 50 stocks. Reliance, TCS, it will invest in that same order because they are benchmarked to it. Non-benchmark investing, where you have to put a lot of effort, identify stocks, weed out the crap, that's small case. And that small case platform is something which we firmly believe in. And we are one of the very, very proud partners of small case in all the strategies that we showed you. So if you're doing an SIP, let's say in a large cap fund or a mid cap fund, you might as well do it in one of the themes, because there your chances of outperforming the market are much higher. Are there charges for small case? Yes, Biju, nothing comes free. There are subscription packs that you'll have to go through. I can talk about our packs. We have chosen the mantra that we want to take equity investing to everyone in India. We are investment bankers, we are advisors, we have our own set of clients whom we advise. But my personal mantra is that every Indian should have equity investments which he has thought about, which he knows are good quality companies, and which are well researched stocks. And with this mantra that every Indian can buy, just like the aviation ministry has the mantra, every Indian can fly, when they launched the Udan scheme, connecting major airports with small airports. Our ethical advisors mantra is that every Indian should buy equity and invest judiciously and in a very, very risk-adjusted manner. Friends, I think it has been our pleasure. It has been our, probably this has been the most engaging webinar we've done. Thanks to Small Case. Thanks to you all. If you have any doubts or questions, please feel free to go to our website, www.ethicaladvisors.in. Our email address is also listed here, dhm@ethicaladvisors.in. Please post your questions, queries, doubts. Feel free to interact with us. It will be a pleasure to guide you. At this point in time, I would make special mention of the Small Case team for giving us this opportunity to present our views, and to also, congratulations on being a very, very gracious host, Abel. Thanks to you and the team.
Thank you so much. I mean, this is one of the, I have to say, is one of the most informative webinars that we've also have on board. And we're really proud to say that thank you so much for coming on board. I know it's you have a very tough schedule. I mean, taking the time to come out on a Saturday evening, a huge webinar, taking the course of his time, directly answering, having an engagement with the audience. It really means for us a lot. I'm pretty sure that all the audience will also be grateful for this. And that's always what we're trying to achieve. The Small Case mantra is also that to make investing more easy, one step at a time, one day at a time. So thank you so much. You've made it easier for us one day and one step at a time. Thank you so much once again. So I think this has given us a basic more insight into what public sector units are and what deep value that they actually hold, and what we might overlook, but I don't think any of us will now overlook because of your webinar today. So thank you so much once again. So is there anything that you would like to add before leaving, or any sort of advice that you would like to give to our viewers?
Yes, I mean, investing in stocks is like choosing your life partner. Sometimes beauty is apparent and sometimes beauty is not. When we are choosing stocks, again, don't go with the news flow. Try to make up your own mind, and also try to evaluate where is the value, where is the beauty, because beauty always lies in the eye of the beholder. Somebody saw ACC at 100 rupees and sold it at 9,000. We should not be buying at 9,000. We should be buying it at, if not 100, at least at 300. So an early bird entry only can happen if you have done work on it. Otherwise, we end up always envying the neighbor, like the old Onida had said, neighbors envy, owner's pride. So this webinar actually wants to open up an entire Pandora of questions and raise awareness on what is the undervaluation. So once we do a little work, if you're not convinced, obviously, you should stay out of that stock or that theme. But we feel that the PSU theme is here to stay, and we strongly urge investors to make it an integral part of a well balanced and a well allocated portfolio.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming on board. So, guys, viewers, if you have any questions, please shoot it up to at dhm at ethicaladvices.in, or please visit their website www.ethicaladvices.in, and their small case microsite where all their small cases are available at ethicaladvices.smallcase.com, which is also available in the description box. Tune in for more webinars and hope to see everyone soon. Thank you once again. Thank you once again. Take care. Bye.
Thank you very much.